The victim everyone forgot, until now. Most people had forgotten her name. If you asked anyone in that small town today who Maria Lopez was, most would just shake their heads and say they didn't know. Some might remember there was a murder a long time ago, but the details would be fuzzy. It happened so many years ago. The victim wasn't famous. She wasn't from a wealthy family. She didn't make the national news. Over time, her story just faded away. Maria was 22 years old when she was killed in 1987. She worked at a small diner, lived in a modest apartment, and was trying to build a better life for herself. She had no powerful connections, no big media coverage, and no one in the system who kept pushing her case year after year. For more than 3 decades, her file sat in a box in a storage room. Detectives came and went. Some read it, shook their heads, and moved on to cases that seemed more solvable or more important at the time. Maria became just another name on a list of cold cases that nobody really expected to solve. Then, in 2020, everything changed. A young detective named Detective Elena Vargas was going through old files during a slow week. She wasn't even supposed to be working on cold cases yet. She was still relatively new to the department. But something about Maria's file caught her attention. Maybe it was the way the reports described her as just another girl from the wrong side of town. Maybe it was the fact that nobody had really fought for her. Detective Vargas started reading. Then she started digging, and what she found didn't just reopen a cold case. It gave a forgotten victim the attention she had been denied for more than 30 years. This isn't a story about a high-profile murder that dominated the news. This is a story about someone who was overlooked, forgotten, and almost left behind forever. And it's also a story about what can happen when one person decides that no victim should be forgotten, no matter how much time has passed. Today on Shadow Files, we're going to walk through the murder of Maria Lopez. We're going to look at why her case was deprioritized from the beginning, why it stayed cold for so long, and how one detective's determination finally brought her the justice she deserved. Disclaimer. Before we continue, I want to be clear. We tell these stories with respect for the victims and their families. We focus on the facts and the investigation process. We will not sensationalize violence or treat these cases as entertainment. These are real people, and we handle their stories with the care and dignity they deserve. Maria Lopez was 22 years old in the spring of 1987. She lived in a small industrial town in Ohio called Lorain, a working-class community where many people worked in factories or service jobs. Maria had moved there a couple of years earlier from a nearby city, hoping to find steady work and build a life for herself. She didn't have much family support. Her parents had passed away when she was younger, and she had been mostly on her own since she was 18. She worked as a waitress at a small diner called Sonny's on the edge of town. It wasn't a glamorous job, but it paid the bills and gave her a small apartment she could afford. People who knew her described her as quiet, hardworking, and polite. She kept to herself mostly, but she was kind to the regular customers and always remembered their orders. She didn't have many close friends in town, but she had a few coworkers she got along with. Maria didn't have a car, so she usually walked to and from work. Her shift at the diner ended around 10 p.m. most nights. On the evening of April 3, 1987, she finished her shift as usual. She said goodbye to her coworkers, put on her coat, and started walking home. That was the last time anyone saw her alive. When Maria didn't show up for her shift the next day, her manager tried calling her apartment. No answer. By the end of the day, when she still hadn't come in and nobody had heard from her, the manager started to worry. She called the police and reported Maria as missing. Officers went to Maria's apartment and found it locked. There were no obvious signs of trouble inside. Her belongings were still there. Her bed was unmade from that morning. It looked like she had simply gone to work and never come home. Because Maria was an adult and there were no immediate signs of foul play, the initial response was limited. Police took the missing person report and started asking around the neighborhood and at the diner. A few people remembered seeing her walking home the night before, but nobody had seen anything suspicious. 3 days later, a jogger found Maria's body in a wooded area about 2 miles from her apartment. She had been killed. The scene was in a somewhat isolated spot, and it was clear that whoever had done this had tried to hide her body. Police processed the scene as best they could with the technology available in 1987. They collected fingerprints, took photographs, and looked for any evidence that might point to a suspect. But the case didn't receive the kind of attention or resources that higher-profile cases might have gotten. Maria wasn't from a wealthy family. She didn't have powerful friends or media connections. She was, in the eyes of some at the time, just another girl who had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. The initial investigation focused on people Maria might have known or interacted with. They spoke with her coworkers, regular customers at the diner, and people who lived near her apartment. One name that came up was a man named Victor Ramirez, who had been seen talking to Maria at the diner on a few occasions. He had a criminal record that included some minor thefts and one assault charge from years earlier. But there was no direct evidence linking him to Maria's murder. Another person of interest was a customer who had been asking about Maria's schedule. But again, without solid physical evidence or witnesses, police couldn't make an arrest. As weeks turned into months, the investigation lost momentum. Other cases came in that seemed more urgent or more solvable. Resources were limited, and Maria's case didn't have anyone in the system actively fighting to keep it alive. By the end of 1988, it had officially gone cold. For Maria's small circle of friends and coworkers, the pain was real. But over time, life moved on. People got new jobs, moved away, and started families. Maria's name came up less and less. She became just another unsolved case in a filing cabinet. For more than 30 years, that's how things stayed. Detectives would occasionally pull her file during slow periods and review it. But nothing new ever surfaced. The evidence collected in 1987 was limited by today's standards. And without better technology, there wasn't much anyone could do. Maria Lopez became one of those victims who quietly faded from memory, not because people didn't care, but because the system didn't have the tools or the resources to keep fighting for her. Then, in early 2020, Detective Elena Vargas was assigned to review some of the older cold cases in the department. She was relatively new to the unit and had been given the task of going through files that hadn't been touched in years. When she opened Maria Lopez's file, she noticed something that bothered her. The reports described Maria in a way that felt dismissive. She was referred to as a transient worker and a girl with no family ties in the area. There was very little follow-up on some of the early leads. It felt like the case had been deprioritized almost from the beginning. Detective Vargas decided to take a closer look. She started rereading every report and looking at the old evidence logs. One thing stood out to her. There had been a small piece of fabric collected near Maria's body that had never been fully tested. Back in 1987, they didn't have the technology to pull usable DNA from something so small and degraded. But now, with modern touch DNA testing, it might be possible. She sent the fabric to the state crime lab. Months passed. Then, in late 2020, the lab called with results. They had recovered a partial DNA profile. It didn't match anyone in the system at first, but when they uploaded it to a genetic genealogy database, they got a hit. The DNA was linked to a family line that included Victor Ramirez, the same man who had been briefly looked at back in 1987. Detectives obtained a warrant and collected a fresh DNA sample from Victor Ramirez. who was now in his late 50s. When they compared it to the evidence from 1987, it was a match. Faced with the DNA evidence, Victor Ramirez eventually confessed. He admitted that he had been obsessed with Maria and had followed her home from the diner that night. He said he had gone to her apartment with the intention of forcing her to talk to him. When she resisted, things escalated. He panicked afterward and tried to hide her body. He had lived with the secret for more than 30 years. He had gotten married, had children, and built a life while Maria's case sat unsolved and largely forgotten. In 2022, Victor Ramirez was arrested and charged with Maria Lopez's murder. He was convicted in 2023 and sentenced to life in prison. For the small group of people who had known Maria, the resolution brought a complicated but necessary sense of closure. After more than 3 decades, someone had finally fought for her. Someone had decided that her life mattered enough to keep looking, even when everyone else had moved on. Detective Elena Vargas has said that this case changed how she approaches her work. She believes that every victim deserves the same level of attention, no matter their background or how much time has passed. She has made it a point to review old cases that were deprioritized in the past. And she encourages other detectives to do the same. Maria Lopez's story is a powerful reminder that some victims are forgotten not because their cases are impossible to solve, but because nobody kept fighting for them. It shows that one person's determination can make a difference, even after decades have gone by. For more than 30 years, Maria was just another name in a cold case file. She was the victim everyone forgot. But thanks to one detective who refused to look the other way, her story finally got the attention it always deserved. And now, the man who took her life is finally facing the consequences he avoided for so long. Thank you for watching this episode of Shadow Files. These kinds of cases show us that even when a victim has been forgotten, it's never too late to fight for the truth. If this story moved you, please consider leaving a like and subscribing. It really helps the channel. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments, as long as you keep them respectful. We'll see you in the next one. Take care of yourself.